Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, people on Zoom, and welcome to our June 7th monthly meeting of Melbourne Users Group. Sorry, July, or we can actually change the date, can we, to July the 5th? If you put it in front of me, I'll read it, just so you know. So welcome all members to the room and on Zoom, and welcome to any new members and any visitors. I want to remind all participants that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. And to remind all Zoom participants, if you could kindly keep your microphones muted unless you are asking a question. Tonight's topic is a very interesting topic. It's titled Getting Off Gas. And we have Rob and Stephen here in the room, and they'll be presenting here, and we'll have an opportunity to ask and answer any questions. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. Fossil fuel, do you want me to read this? I'll read this. Yeah. Okay. Fossil fuel, previously referred to as natural gas, was once a cheap, plentiful fuel and was adopted enthusiastically by most Victorians for heating and cooking needs after discovery of offshore gas resources in Bass Strait. It has supplied low-cost fuel for Victorians for several decades, but now is increasingly hard to source, is becoming expensive, and the effects on the environment and climate can no longer be ignored. The move away from gas has now become urgent and is being encouraged by governments and the environmentally conscious, but for many people it is an expense and optional consideration. What are the pros and cons of making the change? Stephen and Rob will discuss a case study at Rob's house built in 2014, where any decisions were taken with these concerns in mind. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. House design features and choice of appliances that reduce energy consumption and emissions will be discussed. So without further ado, I hand the meeting over to Rob and Stephen.
Thanks, Simon. I'll just add a little extra bit to the intro because I haven't done a build from scratch, but Rob, I'll sort of maybe try and speak to some of the things that I did. My house was built in 2000 and I haven't had as much of an opportunity to influence it, but because I think a lot of people will have either an existing house rather than just thinking about a build. So that way, I guess we can broaden the conversation to a wider audience.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of the conversation that we need to have, because not everybody had my opportunity of starting from scratch. Like you say, everybody's in a house somewhere and it's got its own current performance, and if there's ways to improve it, then let's talk about it. Help people figure out what's a good option for them.
Because definitely, if your house was built and you can't get to it whilst it's in construction, there's still a huge amount that you can do, and we'll speak to that, and we'll give people practical examples that happened in our houses.
Yeah, sure. So I guess my journey started with 30 years lived experience in a solid brick 1920s built Californian bungalow, single story, 2-bedroom. Yeah, 10-foot ceilings. Solid brick means it's a great comfortable place in summer, but is it still loud enough? But it's a dreadful thing to try and heat in winter. It's inefficient, it's costly, there's drafts, there's the mass of the solid brick takes a lot of heating, and it's an expensive thing. We had a couple of boys, so the 2-bedroom house became a 3-bedroom and study sort of house with an upstairs extension over that time. And I did a lot of things. I tried a lot of things to make this house more efficient and economical to run, but in the end I decided I wanted to go somewhere else and try again. So, yeah. I suppose we sat down and thought about what we wanted to do. We were pretty lucky in terms of the land that became available, became a demolished house, gave us an opportunity to design from scratch. And my initial objective, I suppose, was to design and build an 8.5 or 9-star rated house to minimise the energy costs of running. And largely we've achieved that, possibly exceeded it. So it's been an interesting experience.
I suppose just to throw into the story, my house is a 2000. It was finished in 2000. It's a single brick, single story, 3-bedroom townhouse, and it has some amount of insulation in it, but there was no regard for I think any extra efficiency measures. So I think that's probably the biggest, the first difference between our houses is you had a chance to get some of those insulation things in. But I think at some point, let's talk about how retrofitting insulation is actually not that hard. Like, there are people that are very good and quite happy to crawl under houses and crawl on in a roof space, and that can make quite a difference, which is, I mean, it's not about electricity versus gas, but there's still, it can often be good to start with passive energy efficiency measures.
Yeah,
and they're also cheaper.
Yeah, so in our case, the house layout was designed as a passive solar house, so that means it's predominantly facing north with the living areas on the front, lots of windows allowing the sunlight to shine in onto that living space, and the bedrooms are at the rear of the house. I've got photos I can show later, but so yeah, passive just means passive solar means you're making the most use of the solar radiant energy that's available from the sun. And in Melbourne in July, it's not all that much, but what it means is the concrete floor slab can warm up in the sun, and it helps to give a warm, nice radiant sort of feel in the house, in the living areas, and to reduce the energy cost to heat to a comfort level. So I guess in conjunction with that, we put a lot of insulation into the ceiling. The exterior wall construction was what they call SIPs, or structural insulation panels, which meant that, again, the thermal resistance, the thermal performance of the external walls was very good, as was the roof with lots of insulation. The concrete floor slab was what they call a waffle pod slab, which builds a lot of polystyrene insulation into the slab and helps to keep the whole house envelope warm. But on top of that, we decided we'd go with double glazed windows, and that's, I guess, one of the things that people could consider. It's not particularly cheap and economical to do, but if you're really determined, you could retrofit an existing house with double glazed windows.
This is where I'll throw in my really poor man's double glaze story, because even though it's not as nice as a proper double glazing, I got some clear builder's film and some masking tape, some really extra wide painter's tape, and we put these builder's film second insulation layer, especially in the bathrooms. Like, I don't know about your house, but probably most people's houses, the bathrooms and the laundries are just some of the coldest rooms in the house, and we noticed an enormous difference. And the bathrooms have already got sort of frosted, you're not looking out the window anyway because it's frosted for privacy reasons. So if you really want to do a really cheap, quick and dirty double glazing, clear builder's film with painter's tape can actually work quite well. It does not look as nice as a proper double glazing, but for $100 for our entire house as double glazing, the thermal difference that we got out of that is pretty noticeable. And $100 is a lot less than $30,000, which often, some of these double glazings can cost.
There is actually a commercial product out there for people to do that, to retrofit this plastic film. So you get double-sided tape and you get this thin, clear film that you can stretch over that and adhere over the top of you. So it creates a pocket, an air pocket between this plastic film and the glass, existing glass. So that's very much along the lines of what Stephen's talking about. So it's a product that you can buy off the shelf.
Because really, that's what all insulation is doing, is trapping pockets of air. Like,
the idea with this insulation is to keep the air layer still, and air itself is a very good insulator. So yeah, it's a great novel concept to apply to existing houses where it's a bit too much of a financial burden to try and go to retrofitting double glazing. Start
with the $100 builder's film and then work your way up from there. And there's a lot of interim options, and it's a bit of an easy win, because if you've got big windows in your house, and especially if you've got, as you probably do, windows in your laundry and your bathroom, it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah. So to continue trying to get off gas, you're always going to be up against some financial hurdles to get over. If you're looking into doing this, one of the first ones to do, you know, like I'm sort of thinking that my first recommendation to people is to put solar on your roof. Straight away, you're buying less energy from the grid, you're forking out less of your own hard-earned from your pocket to run your house. Beyond solar on your roof, the next biggest one is your space heating requirements, because that's where most of the, you know, particularly in Melbourne, the energy cost of running your house is borne by the space heating system. And it's a big upfront cost to start making changes to it. But, you know, where a lot of Victorians have ducted gas heating, the move away from that to get yourself progressively away from gas, the recommendation that everybody's going with these days is reverse cycle air conditioning. And to make the change, what you've got to, I guess, start thinking about is, instead of trying to heat the whole house, you have a reverse cycle air conditioning in the main living areas, and there's less emphasis on heating bedrooms and so on. So that's typically how people will go. But as I say, it's expensive, so people have got to think about what their own situation is and what their priorities in life are. You know, for me, right from the outset, a lot of this was about, you know, trying to make an improvement on my environmental impact, but I was also quite well aware that it's more economical to run an all-electric house than it's certainly become to run a house that uses gas largely.
Yeah, I think, well, I agree with all of what you said, Rob. I think it's good if we can, and I'll sort of use my own situation to highlight some of these things. Some of this stuff can be expensive, and yes, it's great to have solar, and we've got solar on our roof. That wasn't the first thing that we did. The first thing we did was we went to Aldi and bought a $50 induction stove to try it out. I think it would be fair to say that my wife grew up in a very traditional cooking sort of household. There was the whole, you know, cooking with gas, and it somehow makes the food better. It also creates carbon monoxide, which will kill you. And induction stove, they are really cheap, and they might have been more expensive back in the days, and maybe people's perceptions have stayed back there. But induction stoves are really cheap. The energy that they consume gets far more concentrated into the stove, which is where your food is, which is where you want it to be. You use the range hood a lot less, because you don't have to, unless you're cooking soup or something that's very steamy, you can often, which in winter, you don't want to have air racing through your house because it's cold. And I think there's probably quite a lot of cost-effective measures that you can do to test, like, you know, go and buy a $50 stove and put your toe in the water and see if this induction thing works for you. You will find that some of the bases of your pans, they need to be compatible. They need to have magnetic properties to work. But there's a lot of these things that actually make some of these more cost effective than I think people perceive. Because the other thing is, if you're renting or if you're in an apartment building, you might have a lot less control over what you can do to the building. And I think that's probably where, you know, if we can sort of speak about the easy wins that don't require you to have construction capable, you know, building modification capabilities. And a lot of times, the amount of times people have a split system that probably has heat function, and they never think to use it in the winter because they've just used the gas. And even if you used both, then if you've got the split that's contributing warmth into the space, then that's less work for the gas heater to have to do. And the cost, as you were going back to your point about the reverse cycle, if you are dealing with the heat through a cheaper source, that doesn't mean you can't use gas at the same time. You'll end up spending less money on the heating for that.
Well, that's true, and some people do that. So you can run the gas at a low level to keep the house generally warmish, so like 16 degrees or something, and then for the living areas you have the reverse cycle unit running to get you up to your 19, 20 degrees of comfort levels. So yeah, you can do a combination of things. But yeah, it's good to think in terms of a transition, like Stephen's outlined a transition away from gas cooking via going out and buying a relatively cheap induction one plate induction cooktop, and getting to, the feel for how that works compared to gas, and eventually you realise you can do more and more on your induction cooktop or hot plate, or you go out and think about, okay, can we go and replace the cooktop with a fully fledged 4-plate or one or whatever it might be. And the same thing can happen along the same lines with the reverse cycle air conditioning. You can progress from your gas heating to reverse cycle air conditioning. But yeah, I guess there's a lot of people that have a reverse cycle heating system or air conditioning system in the house and not even realise that they put it in for cooling, and not even realise that they can use it for winter heating. And one of the big advantages that maybe people got more of an understanding these days, but a lot of the heat that you're getting into your space with a reverse cycle air conditioner just simply comes from the air outside. So the heat pump is just like it's pumping water uphill. It's pumping heat uphill from a low temperature to a higher temperature. And that's why the term heat pump is used. So you're not paying for all of the heat that goes into your space. Some of the heat is free from the outside air. And that's one of the features and where the economy of running a reverse cycle heating system comes from.
And I think without us turning this into how the refrigeration cycle works.
We don't want to get too technical.
The heat pumps work really well in cold places like Ballarat, Canberra, Hobart, and other places that can be below zero often. So don't think that just because you live in a particularly cold area that a reverse cycle won't work. It will work. Australia is a pretty simple thermally. In terms of it's cold, it's quite easy to do. These things work in, regions where there's alpine conditions. So they certainly work in Melbourne and Victoria.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people have proved that to be the case. And the same concept can apply when we start to turn our attention to the hot water system, which is probably the next biggest energy consumer in a typical house. If you've got a gas hot water service, it's typically either an instantaneous one where it pushes a whole lot of gas in very quickly so you can get hot water straight out of the tap and it doesn't store anything, or you have a storage type gas hot water service. But either way, the transition to that into a greener no gas world is to go to a heat pump hot water service. And there are some government incentives around depending on what it is your current system is. I think down the track there will be incentive packages for people who actually do have gas hot water, because a lot of people still have the old electric hot water service, which is just a straight resistive type with a storage tank perhaps in the roof or outside, but it's not a heat pump type electric. There are incentives to go to heat pump hot water services, and so the heat pump hot water services are not cheap, but the running costs, as with reverse cycle air conditioning for heating, the running costs are much lower.
I think, just if I could add, then I'm not saying that they're cheap, but I think it's probably worth pointing out that there are some really, you can get the Mercedes of water heater and you can get the Toyota.
There's a big variation in price.
And so I think it's probably just worth pointing out that there, if you want to go really top shelf, you can, but there are far more accessible ones that are a lot more cost effective, and they're kind of close to, I don't know if it's price parity, but they're not that different from some of the other, gas and resistive. So it might not be as expensive as you think, unless you want to go and get the Mercedes of them.
So I suppose the thing to do if you're in that situation is to do a bit of research before your hot water service finally turns up its toes and dies on you. Know what it is that your options are, what your price points might be, what considerations might be, and how easy it is. Maybe even get a quote on getting one installed, and then if the hot water service does die, or you decide it's the time to make a change, which way you're going forward, and you can be ready for it. So. Yeah,
and the other thing is I don't know about all of them, but I know that ours is very, very fast to heat up. When we bought it and it was cold and it was a tank full of cold water and we turned the power on, I was able to, get water that was too hot for my hands in about 15 minutes. So I think that these water heaters are designed to have very quick recovery. So, a lot of people might think, oh, well, we've got to big family or we like to take long showers, these machines will keep up with that. There's no problem there.
Yeah, that's right. As I indicated earlier, I think a good starting point for this sort of journey is to get solar installed on your roof. And if you go to that situation as a first step, when you get to doing the conversion of your hot water service to something like the heat pump system, then you can actually run the heat pump during the time of day when the solar is doing its best. It's performing at its utmost, and you're essentially getting virtually free hot water. And you'll just get the benefit of the reduced running costs for these sorts of installations.
Yeah, definitely. I know ours is. I think we have the same brand of water heater. Ours has got a timer on and it kicks in at about 11 a.m., which is usually there's enough sun. It only uses 1,000 watts of power, electrical power, to run, which is less than half of what the kettle or your dryer in the laundry uses. So they're very cheap to that. If you run it with the solar, you can get it for free and they're quite quick to recover. I just wanted to sort of, when we're talking about, why might you do this? There's a lot of reasons why not having gas as a fuel source in your house is worthwhile, and everybody's got lots of different reasons. And I guess if I'm just throwing mine on the table, it was because we wanted to save money. Like that, our main reason was to save money. And what I have found interesting, and I probably didn't know as much about. I listen to the news and I trust science, and I am very mindful of the climate change science, and so that's important as well. For us, if we had to pick what's our main reason at the time, it was to save money. And I think what I think is really interesting is you get a lot of different reasons, a lot of very compatible motives come into going away from gas and using electricity, because it is cheaper, it's quieter, it's safer in terms of not having carbon monoxide in your stove and things like that. And it's also good for the environment if the electricity is being generated in a renewable manner. So I think, this is, I guess I'm just sort of pointing out, this is not some political, it's not a political left or right type of politics. And I think often some of these discussions get caught up in that, which is just not particularly helpful, because you can save a lot of money. And I don't think where you sit on the political spectrum would change the fact that most people like to save money, and removing gas as a fuel source is a great way of saving money in your energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another consideration that is becoming more and more something in people's minds is that there's actually a health benefit by getting away from gas. If you're running a gas cooktop and you're running a gas oven in your house, you're consuming the oxygen in the air of your house, and you're discharging the products of combustion into your house. And it's been shown that over a large number of studies now that there's an increased risk of asthma in children as a result of those fumes being released into the house, into the environment of the house. So not only is there a cost benefit, as Stephen's outlining, but there's a health benefit as well. And it's starting to become quite a consideration for a lot of people bringing young families up. If that's a thing that you can avoid in your life, imposing something like that on your child, then you're probably going to take that choice if you're aware of it.
I think also because you're not creating carbon monoxide, through your stove. I don't know what you do, but half of the time when we're cooking, we won't use the range hood, because what we're cooking is not producing steam and condensation. If we're making a soup or something, that's different. But that means that when you can cook, it can be a lot quieter. And another thing on the noise part is induction stoves that are built into your kitchen bench are very quiet. I think if people are, like some of the ones you buy at the supermarket or at the appliance store are a little bit noisy, but the ones that go into benches are quiet. And I think it's important to bear that in mind. If you're putting your toe in the water and trying out with induction cooking and you notice how noisy the fan is in the portable one that you bought for $50 at Aldi, that's not representative of how quiet your one, if you go and buy a permanent appliance, will be that an electrician will need to install.
Yeah. So I guess we've had an interesting journey or we've both had interesting journeys from two different starting points, and I guess we're just sort of outlining that there's a whole range of ways that this whole exercise can be approached. And one of the big reasons for me for getting away from gas is the impact on climate change and the heating of the planet. We haven't had a very good last 5 or 10 years or so with making progress in that area. So starting to see that things are moving now is very encouraging. And it was, for me, one of the strong motivations back in 2014 when I was trying to lay down what this house was going to look like. But equally, it was an economical consideration, because even then it was evident that the price of gas was going to keep going up because of the things that were developing in the gas industry. But the impact of gas, just like with coal, on the environment, is undeniable, and it's something that we as individuals can take our own actions on and start to collectively make an impact. So
yeah, there's a really wide spectrum of good reasons, I suppose, I think, and there's not just what we've spoken about. There's if you want to have cool tech in your house, there's plenty of cool tech that you can have. But if you're not interested in having the novelty of tech, then chances are saving money or helping save the environment, that there's so many reasons. And I think it's interesting because it brings together an extremely diverse group of people. Once people get over this perception of it's a political left or right type of thing, and it's expensive and you're subsidizing, you're saving money. And I mean, the technology in these devices, this hardware, is so much better now compared to maybe when air conditioners were expensive to use as a heater. They're now so good. Like my one, for example, for every unit of heat, for every watt of power that it consumes, it will give 5 watts of heat. So it means that I'm putting 1 unit of heat in electrically to heat up the space, and I'm getting 4 for free out of the backyard from the air in the garden where the other outside unit is.
Yeah, that's correct. That's how it works. It's what they call a coefficient of performance in engineering talk. But you're basically only needing to buy a fraction of the energy that you need in heating your house or heating your water. So
it's kind of like a return on investment for heating. Yeah. If you wanted to frame it in a commercial manner.
You could look at it that way. Yeah. Okay.
Are there any other things that you did that helped get more out of your all electric design? Because you don't have a gas meter, do you?
Well, in 2014, I was lucky enough while we were going through the design phase to really think hard about the space heating requirements, and I made a fairly late call to pull out of using gas as the space heater. What we didn't do is we didn't pull out of the gas oven. The oven what we bought was actually a 2-fuel thing. The oven could run on gas or electric or both, and it had a gas cooktop. And so as a result, we had a gas meter. So since then, times have changed, prices have moved, and the consideration for getting something different with the oven came to bear a bit more strongly. In our case, we were able to make a modification where I was able to get an induction cooktop into the top of the standalone oven by just basically taking away all the gas cooktop part. Not something that everybody's going to be able to do because it was a bit involved, but that meant that we could just run the oven on electric, and we had an induction cooktop for cooking, heating up saucepans and the like. And that was the only appliance that we'd ever installed that was requiring gas, and that meant that once we put the induction cooktop in, we could get rid of the gas meter and start to save whatever it is now, $260 a year straight off in your service charge. Your daily service charge amounts to about $260 a year. So
yeah, I think the process, and I say this in a administrative process, because the plumbing process is very simple. The proper qualified plumber will come and take the meter away and put some caps on it, and that's it. But I certainly have heard, and you probably have too, Rob, there's a lot of people that have had really simple processes in getting rid of their gas meter, and there's others that have had horrendously difficult or very expensive ones. So I think depending on what gas network geography you live within and who you get on the phone when you ring up and, you know, have that conversation. And I think how you have that conversation is really important. What I said was that we're doing a renovation and the plumber wants to have the meter abolished and we'll put it back when we're ready. And that was 7 years ago and we're not ready. So we haven't put it back. But I think so I don't know, I'm not aware of what any sort of government intervention, but I would think that the gas networks are, you know, obviously pushing back against that. But yeah, there are parts that aren't simple. They're worth it because why would you want to spend $260 a year for this thing sitting in your garden that gets in the way?
Well, particularly when it increases the cost of you running your space heating or your cooking. So yeah, there's good reasons to start to move away from it. And yeah, there's a lot of industry pushback against people disconnecting the gas. So if anybody, you know, in the audience here is starting to consider going that way, or they've even made the initial moves, you potentially find that there's a bit of resistance from actually getting the gas meter removed, but it's not until you actually get the gas meter removed that the bills stop coming for that service charge. So
yeah,
it is a step you need to make.
And we're all grown up enough to understand what vested interests mean. So of course the utility wants you to keep the meter. Maybe the plumber doesn't want you to remove gas because there's a, you know, source of work that's going to disappear. But I think look at the vested interests of, you know, whatever advice you're getting, how can you make sure that you're getting independent advice? And there's a lot of really good consumer information sources, some that are from nonprofits and some that are just online. And I think, and also, like, you know, local councils also are very motivated. I've seen an increase in a lot of councils that are starting to promote this. And there's, you know, I think there are some councils that do a huge amount and some maybe aren't doing so much, but I think I'm seeing a trend where they're starting to promote this as well. So opinions are generally starting to shift, and there's plenty of good economic and environmental reasons for that shift.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I guess one of the things is that the quicker you get in and do this, the less likely it is you're going to get hit with, you know, disincentive fees for taking that gas meter out. So, you know, as the gas industry finds itself contracting, they might start to impose significant fees on removing that gas meter. So you don't want to be the last person on the network because you might cop the highest bill.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think people just have to look at their priorities in, you know, the way they live and in the house that they're starting with, and just work out which way is the right way to go, how quickly they want to move. Everybody's in their own set of circumstances. We were pretty lucky to have a situation that we had where we could go, you know, a fair way towards achieving our objectives. And yeah, cost of living is high these days, as we're all made well aware of. And yeah, to realise these gains in your running costs, you've got to put a bit of money up front and you've got to work out where the best place for that is in your particular situation, I think.
You've got to put a bit of money up front, but it's probably not as much as you might have thought in as many areas as you might have thought. Like, I suppose this is where, you know, the cooking is so cheap to test out. Go and spend $50 and get a stove and see how it goes. You've got yourself an outdoor electric barbecue right there as well. And actually, I just thought of making a reason I've heard some people in my family said, oh, I don't want to get rid of gas because what if the power goes out? We need to be able to cook. I think you got to remember the safety issues. If you can't have your range hood on and you're creating carbon monoxide in your kitchen, and you've got no power, it's not a good medical alert call to have to be making. So you've got a barbecue outside probably. If you really want to cook, use your barbecue outside, because I don't think there's, I mean, you know, we're using your stove to create light or something like that, I think is, you know, it's actually quite a dangerous idea. Absolutely, so respectfully, I would certainly be inclined to challenge that. And your barbecue can be your contingency cooking machine when your power goes out.
Yeah, that's right. They're all good considerations, and yeah, like we say, we've all got to make our own choices in how we go about this. I suppose we could get to the point of asking if there's
Yeah,
any
questions
from
or
the
even
audience.
comments as well.
Yeah, comments, questions.
Hi, thanks. We've got a solar hot water system on the roof, which is gas boosted. And ideally, we'd like to just keep the system we've got on the roof because it works beautifully in summer, and get it to be electrically boosted rather than gas boosted. And I've sometimes inquired about this, and they said, forget it, it's all too hard, you don't want to know. Have you heard of this being done?
Yeah, I do it all the time. Yeah, so we have, sorry if I may interject. So I'm an electrician and do this sort of work. And one of the things that we do, and I did one recently where there's the they've got solar, they've got solar on the roof. So for electric PV solar, they've got a Sandon, or it doesn't matter what brand, heat pump heating a tank, and we put in a Stiebel Eltron instantaneous hot water unit in front of the heat pump, and we set the instantaneous hot water unit to be 5 degrees less than the heat pump, so that if the heat pump loses if the heat pump's at temperature, the Stiebel Eltron doesn't kick in. But once the Stiebel Eltron drops below, once the heat pump drops below, then the electric will make up. But while the heat pump's heating, as soon as it gets to temperature, the instant electric will sense that and shut off. And it's a very simple, there's no magic required, you just plug it in. You just got to plumb it up correctly. It was in that example where we had a gas boosted hot water unit. So it was just gas storage, was no solar gas. So no solar, just gas storage on a ring main, and they wanted to go off gas. But they didn't want to run out of hot water. So that's because that in our experience, that's the biggest concern of people going off instant gas is they're not concerned about the reduction in energy cost. Their concern is running out of hot water. Yeah, because there's with a heat pump, I know Stephen mentioned that it takes 15 minutes, but going from instantaneous gas to any other source is people with instant gas have been spoiled by able to have long showers.
If I can just add an observation, just sort of reflecting on what you've heard from the tradies that you were dealing with, and then when you speak to a tradie who's thought about it and has done the research and is engaging with new ways of doing things, that's where you can get really different answers. So I say as a consumer, make sure that when you're talking to an electrician or any other person who's going to help you with this, make sure that they know what they're talking about and sort of test them, because I just thought that was really interesting. You've just heard no, and here you go, Simon's just given a really good example of a successful build type on this particular problem.
Yeah, there is a yeah, we'll have a chat, but there is a caveat, and the caveat is that going from gas. So when we design houses, when we say a builder comes to us and says, I want to build this house, and they give us an electrical design, we then design an electrical system based on that design. So where the light points are, where the power points are. And if there's gas, particularly for heating or for heating and hot water, not so much for cooking, but for heating and hot water, that does impact the size of the electrical installation that gets installed. So where we can go from gas boosted to electric instantaneous, the electrical installation had sufficient electrical supply. So, but it's not these days, given that there is a push to go all electric, it's actually quite easy for us to upgrade electrical supply. Yeah, so that's something to consider. So if you go to, say, I don't know, Good Guys, and look at a induction all electric range, it does require a lot of electrical energy. So one needs to consider that in the equation. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't substitute planning and you can't ignore the laws of physics, but you can find the right person to give you advice who's wants to sort of help make it work, rather than someone who either is going to lose business or they just haven't bothered to learn these new methods. And there's a lot of innovation and just skill updates that people need to go through. So I think I've certainly seen a range of some tradies are really good with updating their knowledge, and case in point, and we have another in the audience. And then there's others that just don't care, and for whatever reason, it's just like any kind of professional knowledge, except it's really important and it affects all of us through our warmer or cooler houses.
I think we have a question from Cedric on the Zoom. Are you there, Cedric?
Yes. You were talking about, I've just installed solar panels. They're not switched on as yet, but that's by the way, and a heat pump for hot water. But I've still got two gas appliances, namely ducted heating and stovetop. Well, stovetop's pretty minor, but ducted heating, of course, uses a bit of gas. You commented you think gas prices will continue to go up. I'm wondering whether that's so. To me, gas prices are largely quite a bit influenced by Russian policy of cutting gas supplies. If we manage to solve something in the Ukraine situation, what are the chances that we will see a stabilisation or even slight reduction of gas prices?
Okay, yeah, thanks for your question, Cedric. I think gas prices will continue to go up. There's so much pressure on energy supplies around the world. Europe will continue to want to move into a new realm of energy generation, and they need to transition through gas in the short term. So while they might be trying to do as much as they can with offshore wind generation and solar where they can and so on, they will still be in a situation where they're going to be using gas, and other countries are in similar situations. So the world price for gas is not going to go down anytime soon. It's going to continue to climb. The resolution of something in Ukraine will maybe help, but I think the momentum is still there to keep the pressure on gas prices.
I think also I'd just add a comment, probably more on if you've got gas heating, air conditioners. If you pick your most heavily used room in your house, and you got a reverse cycle heat pump in that room, then you can almost treat it like a bit of a low-hanging fruit. Like if you're not ready to remove your gas furnace, and you may never do that, but if you pick a room that you're going to get the most bang for your buck and you warm that room, then you're already probably gaining, a reasonably good percentage, because that's the room that you use the most. And I think it's unlikely to be the bedroom, because you've got blankets and an extra layer that you can do, but it's probably going to be the living space. And I think the way your house, the sort of geometry of how your house is laid out is important, but usually there's, every house has got their most heavily used room. And if you've got a reverse cycle air conditioner in that room, then you can probably make it very comfortable in the winter with electricity.
I would see it the same way, that your living area is the one where you want to put your first attempt at, or getting used to the idea of reverse cycle air conditioning. That's the big energy consumer is your living space, and that's where you want the comfort level. So that's where you'd do your investment first.
I have a question from Noel. So Noel has 3 air conditioners installed in 2006, and has a question about reverse cycle and increased use or increased demand on the equipment. So you use running an, if I may, Rob, yeah, running an air conditioner in reverse cycle is using exactly the same components in the air conditioner. So it doesn't add extra load onto the unit running it in heating, but of course you do sort of factor in that you do have more running time. So if you only used the air conditioner in summer for cooling, running it for heating in winter will mean that there's more run time. So I think with Noel's question, if I've interpreted it correctly, Noel, there's running the units in heating doesn't add extra load to the system. An hour in heating and an hour in cooling is exactly the same. But what will change is obviously you've got more running time. So if you've got older units, your compressor will be running for twice as much time in a year, which I'd expect to reduce its life to a point.
Generally, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, except there's a consideration that you could take that in summer, if you've got 35 or 40 degrees outside and you're chasing to get 20 or 22 in your living room, then you're after a fairly significant temperature difference between outside and inside. Whereas in winter, you might be still wanting your 20 degrees roughly inside, but it's maybe only 10 outside. So you've only got a 10 degree difference as opposed to maybe 15, 20 degree difference in summer. So your actual running cost per hour would well be lower for heating.
Yeah, that's of course, yes.
In heating mode as opposed to in cooling mode for the same equipment.
Run as hard. Yeah. Noel, did that answer your question? Was your question answered? And we've got a question from David.
I have a question about you're talking about ducted gas furnaces or ducted heating, and I think most of us probably have that because we're old enough to have come from those times. Now, what about a big reverse cycle unit which would replace the gas-fired furnace? Does anyone know about that?
Yep, there's been quite a lot of review of that situation, David. It's generally sort of accepted that it's a fairly expensive exercise. You can be talking, something like, $15,000 type conversion to go to that sort of change because it's significantly sized equipment, and you're again trying to maintain the situation that, a lot of us had for a long time of having the whole of the house being at a comfort level. Whereas I guess the economical route forward is, as we've already talked about, is just having your reverse cycle air conditioner running in a heating mode in your living spaces predominantly, and we tend to let the bedroom temperatures drift towards the lower end, and as you say, you just get under the blankets. So it's the living spaces, but I mean, from a practical point of view, these things can be done. I would refer people to the the Facebook page called My Efficient Electric Home. There's been a lot of discussion in there. There's a lot of people that have posted information about that, and you'll be able to read people's experiences and people that have had cost estimates and quotes on making that change. I'm sort of thinking that it's a natural thing to look at first up, but when you boil it down, it's probably not the most economical way to go.
But if you wish to stay in your existing home, not many of us want to start building new houses at the present time. So we're looking perhaps for a solution which would heat or cool an older style home with more rooms, not great big open spaces, using the facilities that we have.
So like Stephen outlined before, you perhaps don't go all the way straight up with getting rid of or converting completely your existing gas-fired ducted system, but you run it at a lowish temperature and use a newly installed split in the living areas to supplement that and bring it to a comfort level. So it's sort of like, which way do you want to transition? I guess Stephen's outlining that there's a way to do that without jumping right off the gas as your primary source of fuel.
We had when we got our first reverse cycle, it went into our lounge room, And so that is physically a very central room in our house, and it's also the most heavily used room when we're awake. And that we kept it on all the time. So we didn't have it at a high temperature, but we allowed it to stay on so that, what the walls would eventually absorb the heat, and it would sort of, radiate into the peripheries of that area. In terms of, in the bedrooms and blankets, I know that sounds old school, but if you're, in a room where you're just going to sleep, just pick a right blanket, put a beanie on. I'd say with cooling, and I know we're having this conversation in July and we're not thinking about cooling, but having a ceiling fan is just such a fantastic, it's so cheap, and it's such an effective way of not feeling hot and stinking in summer. So I would definitely say having a ceiling fan, or I'd even go another step further, and maybe this is kind of going into the optimization, but if you run your ceiling fan on reverse so that it's blowing air at the roof and coming down the walls, and you've got a reverse cycle in, you will find that the whole room feels a lot warmer throughout the whole space, because heat rises, and what a fan does is it works against that, and so it'll warm your toes up. But you're probably wearing socks because it's winter, and that's what your parents taught you, and that's what you should do first before you touch the thermostat.
Did you want to comment any further on that, Dave?
Oh, I think that the last answer, no, I wouldn't want to comment on that. I'm not that silly. I mean, one turns the heater off at night, but still, if you don't live in your lounge room all the time, and if your spouse likes to have a warm house throughout, then it's not so simple if you've got multiple rooms rather than one large living area. What about the cooling systems built into the roof, which depend on evaporating water? Now, they're very cheap.
They work in some circumstances, some weather conditions, and not so much in others. You're talking about the cooling mode, of course.
And we're talking about Melbourne rather than, say, some of the more humid areas.
That's right. The most effective conditions for those to run in is when the air is relatively dry. If it's humid, you don't get anything like the benefit from an evaporative system.
That's right.
And they do rely on moving a lot of air, so the power consumption from the fan can be not insignificant. And some people have argued that a reverse cycle air conditioner is more economical to run.
The other thing is, if you've got a ducted evaporative cooling and it's in winter, because when it's not summer, it's going to be heading towards winter, unless you've gone up into every duct and put foam to block the air from flowing, heat rises. So all that warm air that you've got in your house is going to go up like a thermal chimney out through your roof. And so when you put these things in, you just got to remember that you're punching holes in the insulation, and in winter that's more likely to catch up with you and make you feel colder.
There I would like to comment, Stephen, the Victorian government is paying teams of people to go around Melbourne and apply plastic covers on your ducting so the heat doesn't go up there these days, and they're doing that free of charge.
Yeah, there are a lot of initiatives like that, and that's a great way of stopping the air from moving. I suppose the only limitation that I'd point out is in summer you're going to want to take those covers off, and you've got to get up and do the sort of maintenance activity. But yeah, there are definitely energy, they're not free, they're subsidized, but there's, you can get free little upgrades here and there for your house. I know that there's, you can get foam to block drafts from the doors, and there's a lot of different, they seem to sort of come in waves, and some might be about LED lights and thermal efficiency. So certainly look out for those and utilize them, like as David suggested, because they are good.
I think this is more for people in the room. You have a comment from Stuart chronically. Generally, to convert a gas system to reverse cycle requires the ducts to be replaced with larger ducts to suit the needs of the reverse cycle system.
Yes, that's true. You need higher volumes of air, and typically what you find too is the original ducted systems that have been installed had very low insulation ratings on the ducts themselves. So if they typically run under the floor or they run through the roof space, they're in cold air. So if they're in heating, you can be losing a lot of your gas input energy out into the roof space or under the floor of your house, which doesn't help all that much. And yeah, for cooling, the duct size is usually required to be larger than it is for heating. So there's potentially a requirement to replace your ducting to maintain an electric system as a ducted system.
I think I'd also just make the comment comparing ducted anything, whether it's heat pump based or gas furnace. Split systems I'd say they're more targeted. So not saying that ducted is better or worse or split is better and worse, but ducted is bigger and more heavy duty, and you can that they cost 15 grand because you can heat the whole house and you can do it fairly quickly. That's not targeted at all. So if you're wanting to go with targeted, and I certainly appreciate the point that you made, Dave, about if you've got a house with lots of rooms that's not a big open plan, that's more complicated to do targeted heating because the walls and the doors will block movement of heat. But if you look at it sort of as a balance, there's different approaches that you can take. And yes, I suppose neither Rob or I or Simon is trying to suggest that this is simple. There's a lot of different options, and I suppose it's about engaging with the different choices that you could make that are appropriate both for your budget but also for the layout of your house.
Yeah, and I think Dave's point's an important one to consider because, and it refers back to what we were saying earlier, that everybody's in their own particular set of circumstances, and you've got to make the best judgment call for your circumstance. You know what your budget limitations are, what your house is as it currently stands. It's a matter of looking at your options and working out what your best ultimate plan is and what your transition towards that is, what sort of steps you can take to move there slowly and soften the economic blow, but at the same time achieve your reduction in running costs.
I am.
Okay. Is that someone asking a question? Okay. I'd like to thank Rob and Stephen for their contributions this evening. So thank you. And on behalf of the MelbPC users group, thank you for giving up your time this evening. A round of applause. All right. I'd now like to welcome Hugh McDonald for the President's Report. Hugh. Here he comes.
Yeah, thanks, Simon, and good evening, everyone, whether you're here in Moorabbin or whether you're out there on Zoom. So a few things to go through this month. We've had some technology upgrades here at Moorabbin. So if you're here tonight, the first one, Lee, that you'll notice is we have a second screen projecting the entire Zoom meeting to everyone here in the room. So we've put that in to make more of a cohesive experience between the people who are here at Moorabbin and the people who are out there on Zoom. So you can see everyone who's out there on Zoom, and everyone who's on Zoom can see you in here because we switched you with the audience camera from time to time. So Rob Brown was instrumental in getting that moved into here and getting that set up. So I'd like to start with a big thank you to Rob for taking the time to do that. Obviously, this club runs on volunteer resources and volunteer time, so we're very appreciative of that. The other new piece of technology that we put in is a 65-inch TV in the lounge. So it's a Google TV. It's got a built-in Chromecast, It's also got all the usual apps like Netflix and ABC iView and all those kind of ones. So it's been great for the Coda Dojo. So we run Coda Dojo in there usually every Saturday during term time. And so now the participants can cast their screens up onto the big screen and share their work with the entire group. And the leader of the group can also, cast his or her screen up there and take the participants through the topic for that week. So that's been really good as well. And that was Rob once again and Aidan Kelly who were instrumental in putting that in. So I'd once again like to thank them. We've had some IT improvements for SIGs. So the IT team of Rob Brown, Aidan Kelly again, and Stephen Zuluaga, and I'm kind of slightly lesser involved in that team, but still involved, have brought in a Nextcloud instance for the club, and this has been rolled out to SIGs. So Nextcloud is an open source piece of software you can install on a Linux server, and enables you to make your own basically your own cloud that you can access via your phone or via a web browser from anywhere in the world. So if you don't like the the idea of sharing all your data with a big corporation like Microsoft or like Google, then Nextcloud is an alternative where you can it's still your data living on your hardware, but still accessible all throughout the world. So we put that in for the SIGs and rolled that out. And as I said, that IT team that I mentioned was instrumental in doing that. So a big thank you to those guys for that. The other piece of news for the month in terms of developments in the club is the new homepage. So you might have noticed going to the homepage that it's now been updated, and so that's been the responsibility of the web development group of Rob Brown, Kelvin Cording, David Haddon, John Swell, and John Thompson. So a big thank you to all those guys for the work that they put in on that homepage. And so yeah, if you're wondering why we've made the change to the homepage, we had to think about the role that the homepage was playing, and we wanted to have a homepage that was more of a marketing friendly homepage, more likely to sell the major services that the club offers to anyone that's coming along who may be interested in joining the club, which is of course what we're all about. We want to get more members into this place. So yeah, the web development group feel that they've made that change in the homepage, and yeah, so hopefully it's been well received by all members. I know the web development group always appreciate feedback at any stage. So I think at the bottom of the homepage there's an email address for the web development group. So if you want to send them feedback, then and just use that email address to send them feedback, or also via the office is fine as well. Last thing for this month is the August monthly meeting. So our topic is going to be on self-publishing and writing. So we've got one speaker lined up that we're going to unveil, but we'd like to introduce more as well. So if you're out there, if you've published something yourself, or you're thinking about publishing something, or you're writing your memoirs, or you've written your memoirs, or you contribute to a magazine, or you're involved in writing semi-professionally, I guess you'd say, in any kind of way, then we'd love to hear from you. Love to get you involved in the next meeting, whether it's here at Moorabbin or via Zoom. So if you can contact Kirsten Green, who's the main speaker organizer for the meetings, her email address is kgreed@melbpc.org.au. So she'd love to hear from you if you fit in that category. So that's all the major updates for this month. Are there any questions, either from people in the audience here at Moorabbin or out there on Zoom? Speak up if there is. No, just a bit of audio there. All right, well, thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed the meeting so far, and hope you have a good month ahead, and I'll see you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. So I now invite Harry Lewis to begin the iHelp live via Zoom. I just want to remind members, if you have any computer issues that need solving, this is the time to ask. I'd also like to remind members that iHelp is available Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. for any member. Are you there, Harry?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Well, greetings all. Before I open the bidding for questions, I had just a couple of remarks about recent business. iHelp gets all kinds of questions, but there is a cluster of recurring topics that are around logins to our services and occasionally to other services, and about email, which of course overlap when we're talking about our own email service. Now, a few days ago, we had an interruption of the normal login service, mostly used by members when they renew their subscriptions, and they click a link, which takes them to a login page, and that had stopped working. It's working again now, but I thought I'd say a word about what members are seeing there, because even now it sometimes causes confusion. What you might call the logic of the situation hasn't changed since we were with Microsoft. What's going on is that the services, MelbPC services, are hosted with our website by WordPress. So when we log in, we're actually being admitted into the WordPress system, if you like. But it's using what's called a single sign-on, which is exactly what we had with Microsoft. And most of us are by now all too familiar with it, because if you start trying to access a new website with a login, odds on you'll be invited either to create your own account with your own username, or to log in using Google or Facebook or another of those services. That's to say, the service you're accessing is using a single sign-on, except in these cases, they're actually accepting credentials from more than one entity. Now, why I thought it was worth mentioning what's going on here is that depending where we were in the last couple of years, really, what you saw in your travel from that link in your renewal email to the form where you could fill in your payment or you could change your personal details has been changing. Even over the last few days when the service was restored, it seems to have been changing. I won't say continuously, but there have been a number of changes. But the main thing I hope everyone does understand, and I suspect that most of present company does, is that what's going on is that when you click the link is actually to our WordPress web service. You'll see the initials WP somewhere in the URL. But when we ask to go there, up comes the red flag saying, wait a minute, you've got to log in. And it's been programmed to call on your Google login at that point. Now, some time ago, you had actually to actively click at the top of the login screen, log into your MelbPC account. I did just manage to get that one back by logging out and then trying to log in again. But at the moment, most of the time, what happens is that very briefly, a WordPress login comes on the screen with a big W at the top. That's how you know it's WordPress. And then you'll see at the bottom, redirecting to login.google.com. I think that particular phrase is new now in the last few days, because I think behind the scenes, there's already still some quite active work being done on this particular journey. With luck, you'll see that for a very short time. That's been much improved from what it used to be. You used to have to get out of it proactively. You just have to be passive. And with luck, you'll scarcely see that. But sometimes in the last couple of days, it sat looking at me for 2 or 3 seconds before it's gone. So you shouldn't have to do anything about it. It's just that you might need to wait a moment before you get there. And then, of course, you get to what is a Google login. And again, probably the right audience for this are exactly the people not in this particular room. But your login for the MelbPC service is, of course, carried by our Google Workspace system. So it is a Google login. It's a workspace login, workspace being the business end of the Google system. But even now, we're occasionally talking to members who just think they're in the wrong place because they're asked to log in to a Google account. So at the risk of telling you the blindingly obvious, I thought I'd just mention that because it does come up from time to time. Even recently, I was kind of pleasantly surprised to speak with a member who'd still got foxed by the fact that some gremlin, sometime before the end of the Cretaceous period, had created a Gmail account using his MelbPC username. And most of us, I think, in iHelp had no idea that had gone on when we did the transition. We knew perfectly well that just about every member had what became a personal Microsoft account because we had the year with Outlook.com. But somehow by magic, this interplanetary ballistic missile had caused Melbourne Gmail accounts of a personal kind to be created using MelbPC email addresses. And that was a kind of festering sore for any member who had that combination. And I was still quite surprised to find that there was at least one member in the last couple of weeks who'd lived peacefully with that arrangement until very recently. There's just one other topic I wanted to mention, which isn't directly well, it doesn't come up much in iHelp at the moment, but it's come up with a family member. And it's underlined the interesting situation we're in, indeed the country is in, with regard to internet and high-speed internet. So way back when the concept of the NBN was that, of course, every household would not only have a right to have it, but was expected to be using it. As time has gone on, the speed and reliability of mobile broadband has improved. And by now there are people who are favoring 5G broadband if they can get it over NBN. There are 2 other new kids on the block I thought were worth mentioning. One is Elon Musk's satellite system, which has Telstra has just done a deal with them, but mainly for bush locations hitherto served only by Sky Muster, which is the wholly inadequate satellite service that the NBN was given. There'll be very few of our members, I think, in any situation to make use of any improvement in the Telstra satellite-based service, because now the Musk satellites are going to be available in not immediately, I think, but fairly soon to those people. Another one I was completely unaware of until my sister-in-law asked me about this was something called Gigacom, G-I-G-A capital C-O-M-M. And I had to do some rapid research on this. This could possibly be of interest to you if you're living in shared accommodation, particularly physically unified, as in blocks of apartments. I think that unity is a fairly important aspect of it. But Gigacom is a new kid on the block in the sense that they've only been around since about 2019, but they are certainly targeting shared accommodation of that kind with a technology which is not using NBN at all. So they seem to have their own backhaul, or almost certainly purchased backhaul. And in the case of the building I've been aware of, they would put an antenna on the roof and they'd fill the building with a Wi-Fi mesh. So that, and if you, their selling point is going to be getting higher speed than you can typically get from NBN at a competitive price. Now, the reason my sister-in-law approached me about this was because she wasn't at all clear whether in her building they would be free to decline this service. And I found out to my surprise that you can't stop them installing their gear in your building. This is a right that's been given under legislation, presumably in the context of the creation of NBN, to support competition in that sector. Individuals that would be free not to take up the service. And interestingly, at least in this case, it doesn't use any existing infrastructure. There's a constraint on Gigacom and any competitors that they're not allowed to use infrastructure that's owned by the body corporate or the owner's corporation without permission. But in this case, if you put an antenna on the roof and you put in a few Wi-Fi repeaters in the building, you're not using any of the old system. So I'd be interested to hear, as we get to chatting, whether anyone here at all has experienced this new invasion. I picked up a story from the SMH a year ago where people were complaining about the aggressive marketing of this and not being given a voice in it getting into their buildings. So I think I'll pause there and open you all, invite questions and see where we get to. I will change my view so I can see any hands. Gallery, right. But at the moment, I can only see one screen of 3, so I'm afraid you'll have to shout as well as raising your hand, because I don't think I can magically see 3 screens at once at the moment.
Harry, you've got questions on chat.
I have, oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Thank you. Yes, I don't know. I must make that show up, mustn't I? Good. My goodness. Now then. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Michael.
Sorry about that, Harry.
Now, you're seeing me courtesy of Logitech, I'll have you know. But why should that? I wonder what model I've got. I really can't quite make it out. I don't think it's yours. I have to get my magnifying glass out to remind myself what I'm looking through. I think it's weird if the light, it was getting power. Okay, let's say perhaps not weird, Mike, because that just means it's getting power, doesn't it? Ah. So the problem's at the computer side then, is it, Mike?
Well, it's a mystery because I spent ages chasing with Kaspersky because it was suspected as being the cause of it. And there was a lot of chat on the internet to that effect. Very, very briefly, one of the weird combinations of settings that they gave me did switch it on for 3 seconds and then it stopped again.
Yeah.
And a similar experience with Logitech themselves, just could not chase it down. I have a feeling that it's something very, very deep in the system. The fact that the webcam works okay on another computer instantly, it's a plug and play device. So there's nothing wrong with the camera whatsoever. It's something weird that's in the system.
And this is a desktop computer, right? You won't
Yeah.
automatically have another camera to cross-test on the computer, will you?
Yeah.
Probably.
I don't really expect you to have the answer off the top of your head, because it's very, very deep. But if you do come across anything that is a clue, I would certainly be grateful for it.
Well, does anyone, we've still got a good quorum present. Anybody else in the room got any thoughts, including the unseen room, of course? I'm not seeing the people in Moorabbin. I'm just seeing the people who are online, I think.
Yeah.
Not even seeing Mike, actually. I'm just seeing his flower bed, but that's okay.
Can I ask Michael Allison, has he run the Windows troubleshooters for the camera?
Yes, I have. And,
okay, and have you gone down and set the permissions for the camera to be on using Zoom?
Yes.
Because there are independent application permissions there, and Zoom should be okay.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, as you can see from my small view, there's a background there of my garden. That's okay, but there's no image of me superimposed on top of it. The light is on. I can see the light, and clearly the microphone is working, but there's a refusal for the image to appear.
Maybe there's a Zoom setting.
Well, this is the case on Skype as well. Anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And if it's affecting Skype, it's nothing to do with Zoom as such, then, is it?
No.
No, I think it's a really weird one that's buried very, very deep, and possibly the culprit doesn't want anybody to know.
Mm.
Yes, I have tried pausing Kaspersky protection. That was one of the things they suggested. Made me a bit nervous. I should have pulled the plug on the internet, I suppose.
Yeah, I think mine's HD 720.
Right.
With HD in front. I don't think I'm seeing a 270.
Right.
I'd have to shine a light on it. I won't distract you by that. Well, if anyone in the room has a further thought about that, please do come back to it. But we do now have another question from John Harris. Is there a way to back up photos on Microsoft OneDrive? John, do you mean you've got them on OneDrive already, or you want to get them to it? Is John Harris available to?
Yes, they're actually on OneDrive, Harry, at the moment.
Okay, so if they're on your OneDrive, they're already backed up by Microsoft, as it were, in the cloud, aren't they?
Yes, well, I'm thinking I've got Google Drive, and the photos are backed up on there, and I'm paying for a subscription, which I don't really need, to Microsoft 360, which includes the OneDrive. And I want to give away the OneDrive, but I want to still be able to or back up the photos that are on OneDrive now, just in case some of the other photos aren't on Google Drive, you know what I mean?
Now, I think this is right. So, starting place, you have the OneDrive folder on your computer, fully synchronized with the cloud. Make sure of that.
Right.
You then detach it from the cloud. There's a setting where you can say, now again, the exact wording isn't there, but for different reasons, we may need to break the umbilical cord that synchronizes. At that point, simply rename your OneDrive folder. You now have control of it. It's a local folder. So that is now a folder on your computer that in the first instance, of course, can be backed up. It was already true that any of the, well, I say any, I've got to be careful here. Not only OneDrive, but also we'll stay with OneDrive. The exception here is Google, and I'll explain why in a minute. Anyway, Dropbox I was thinking of because I use that, but any of those, and iCloud is the same, where you get what looks like a Windows folder on your desktop that is synchronizing with the cloud, subject to your settings, because most of them now are clever enough to let you limit how much you hold locally. It's obviously the case has to be the case with a 1 terabyte OneDrive, because who's got room on his computer just for synchronizing 500 gigabytes on top of everything else? So you can select what you synchronize with OneDrive. As long as you've synced all the photos, you have a copy of all of them. It's identical. They're not playing the Apple game, but some of them are thumbnails and some of them aren't. So then you detach it, you rename the folder, you've got it on your computer. Now, exactly where we are with the Google setting, I'm not sure. Google has given up its version of OneDrive. In one respect, it doesn't give you a folder any longer, it gives you a virtual drive, right? So that's behaving more like web pages, where the cloud holds everything all the time, as is always true with these things, of course, but you only have intermittent contact with the cloud on your computer. But as long as you've got room in your 30 gigabyte MelbPC, Google Drive, or indeed, if like me, you've already paid Google the king's shilling and you've got shared access to 100 gigabytes, you can simply copy, drag and drop, or even create a new way. I think you've got to do a movement within Windows, because logically your fossilized OneDrive folder is just any old local folder, right? But your Google folder system is live to the internet. So that's certainly one way of doing it. I think you can also do an upload at folder level from the cloud, from a login to Google Drive. So that would be another possibility. You just say upload, and then you go, and then you navigate in Windows Explorer to find what you're uploading. I think I'd use the first method because I think it could be more robust against forms of interruption. Is that any help, John, or do you want to take it further?
Yeah, I think I'll try that. Thanks, Harry, and see how I go. The other option I was thinking of was, I think I'm paying about nearly $11 a month for the OneDrive, including Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, etc. Can that account be converted just to a OneDrive backup only, like the folder backup?
I think I think there's a bit of Microsoft philosophy here, if I can use that. I refuse to call it philosophy. Business model. You'll know that you can buy, for example, Word on its own for about half the price of the whole suite. And I suspect I'm sure you can get. But it's a personal OneDrive. It would be a one-off. I don't know. Personal OneDrive only service. Let's see if I can get anything with that. Compare OneDrive pricing and cloud storage plans. Let me see if that'll tell me. That's Microsoft. Go down the page. No, it's not giving me. It's only giving me the bundles at the moment. There's a product called Microsoft 365 Basic at $3 a month that includes 100 gigabytes of cloud storage. In fact, that's really what it's about, John, because it doesn't contain any of the desktop apps. It only gives you web and mobile versions.
Right.
It says ad-free Outlook and mobile email. So I think it's a cloud-only subset of the other products, because we can all use the mobile apps, actually, even if we haven't got an account, can't we? But you get 100 gigabytes of cloud storage with that one. Now, what could be an advantage of that is that I'm putting money on you being able to migrate the existing Microsoft account identified by the email address and password, right? So that kind of sits above the rights you give it by paying Microsoft the King's shilling or the King's dollar, right? So you can, as long as it's in the personal realm, you can't move personal into business or business into personal using the same account name, pretty obviously, actually, because it's going to have a different email address, come to think of it.
Mm.
But as long as you have any old Outlook.com, Hotmail.com, Live.com identity, you can bless that with the privileges of one or another of the packages that you pay for. So,
okay.
But you're not paying $11 a month, you're paying $3 a month or $30 a year, as quoted in Australian dollars on the Microsoft site now.
Right, okay.
So that way, you don't need to move anything anywhere, except that what you would probably, I'm not sure about this one, John. I'm not going to lay money on this, and others may know better about this. I suspect that you could change the license on your existing OneDrive without necessarily closing that connection. I wouldn't advise it, and I'd certainly be backing up those photos. Of course, if you've got a lot of photos, that's a lot of data. But if you've got a normal backup of your computer that includes all the OneDrive, you've got it there anyway. As a result, I'm guessing that because you're moving to a smaller OneDrive. I'm 75% confident you might not need to do anything else in principle, but I certainly wouldn't do it without having a backup for the transition, okay? If you decided to go that way.
All righty, I'll have a play around and see how I go. Thanks, Harry.
Yeah. Anybody else present would like to improve on or correct what I've said there, by the way?
Yes, Harry, what you're talking about is exactly what I've got. What was 100 gigabyte of OneDrive, that's the only Microsoft service I have, so I'm paying $3 a month, except they've recently upgraded it to 150 gigabyte. So,
oh, right.
well, I don't know whether it's because I've been a customer for 6 months or whether you get 150 straight away.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily die of surprise if Microsoft's website isn't up to date on that one. Especially as it's the Australian website, the news probably takes time to get through to whoever makes these changes.
Well, basically, it's just showing that there's 150 there. I haven't tested it. I've only got 75 in the thing. So
no, fair play. But you can see. Look, you'll be seeing the meter that tells you how much of the storage you're using and so on. So if you've got 150, I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
Graham Neal, hello.
Yes, good evening, Harry, and good evening, everybody. I've got a question about a Kyocera laser printer. I've been using Hot Toner, which is a no-name toner supplier, rather than the Kyocera toner. I've swapped the cartridges several times with that and had success. Recently, I ran out of a Cyan toner and put a Hot Toner one in, and even with the brand new cartridge, it says this cartridge is empty. So I went and bought another no-name one from the same supplier, and again, no toner. So I was wondering, does anybody know how does the laser printer sense the toner level, or how does the cartridge communicate the toner level to the printer?
I suspect, Graham, that what you've hit there is nothing to do with how much ink is in the toner. But I'm interested that that's happened in real time, because I'm talking the other day to a member who's successfully used, this was only ink, but the manufacturers there is an arms race, isn't there, here?
Mm.
That I think anyone who's bought a printer in the last 4 or 5 years will find that if they put a grey toner cartridge in or a grey ink cartridge in, the thing will complain. I'm not sure that many printers that I've heard of fold their arms and absolutely refuse to do anything. But I think for that to have happened, Graham, your printer would have needed to have a firmware update or something. Or there might, unless there's a subtle difference in the cartridges you're buying, which I would have thought be implausible, because there's no interest in the people making some money, we hope, out of providing the third-party cartridges in making it more difficult to use them.
Mm.
But they have chips in them, don't they, these things?
They do. There is a little chip on the cartridge. But you would expect getting, I mean, even if one cartridge was faulty or the chip on that cartridge was faulty, you would think getting a second one was would resolve that issue.
And the trouble is that the Mills Methods experiments here are very expensive. In other words,
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, you buy a different color and see if that's happened as well, and so on. But the lab has quite a high budget at this point, doesn't it?
Exactly. The no-name ones are considerably cheaper than the printer brand name ones, by about 3 times. Yeah. But even so, it's still significant.
No, I'm interested because I get we got 2 ink printers in the house from, is it called Cartridge Warehouse? The guy spoke at MelbPC about 5 years ago, named John, Jon, and he supplies the third-party ones. Because we do so little printing, I'd kind of given up on them because I got so fed up with the notices from the printers. But I don't think that they ever stopped working. And clearly, if they really were stopping working a lot, the market for them would go, wouldn't it?
Mm.
But and of course, we all think that morally the printer business model is so corrupt. In other words, you get given what should cost you about $600 for $200, and then as soon as you buy the 6 cartridges, bang goes another $200. Especially because when you buy it, it's got only tiny little quantities of ink in it, hasn't it?
Yep.
So, I mean, it's you know, it's a little like a monopoly in the provision of the now decadent petrol. If there was a monopoly in selling petrol and also selling motor cars, they'd sell you a motor car for $5 and make sure they made it back in petrol over the first 3 years.
Yeah.
I think there are 1 or 2 other markets like this where you buy hardware that's quite amazing. And I can't believe that you can buy for around $100 a printer that will print double-sided, that will scan and all that. And the reason is I think that they're making the money the other way, isn't it?
Mm.
Of course, the most annoying thing of all is, so you buy up at least 1 cartridge in advance of use, and then the printer turns up its toes when you discover that they long since stopped making printers that use that cartridge.
Yep, been caught with that one too. Now, it sounds like nobody else has got any suggestions, so I just thought it was worth asking.
Anyone else want to? I am not very expert on printers, but it's an area of a notable lack of standardization.
Mm.
I mean, if I'm helping a member or trying to, using a reasonably recent version of Windows, or even as it happens, Mac OS X, I can quite possibly see what they're seeing on my computer without sharing the window. Also, there's a significant level of standardization that you can talk about what's happening with printers. the visibility of what's going on is very limited, even with the little BD little display units. But they all seem to talk different languages, don't they?
Yep.
Gentlemen, if I may just interject, we are at 9 o'clock.
All right. So we should stop recording, I think, Chairman, shouldn't we?
Yep. Thanks, Harry.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Harry. The next meeting will be the first Wednesday of next month. I do not have the date in front of me, so apologies about that. 2nd of August, thank you, John, at 7 p.m. In Moorabbin here and on Zoom. So thank you, everyone, for your attendance, both in person and on Zoom, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.